think this is a good way to start off the new. Can you hear me, friends? Okay. I think this is a good way to start off the new year by having this presentation from Anna on an area, a subject that will kind of not only ground us in reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, but particularly the Indigenous peoples among us, our neighbors. So it's not just something abstract, but very concrete. And we're very fortunate to have Anna with us. She's been an active attender in our meeting for 2 or 3 years now, isn't it, Anna? Yes, and hopefully maybe soon to join the membership.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And a very active member of our reconciliation committee. And I will let Anna kind of give a bit of her own personal background and just we'll go on until and there will be some time after Anna's presentation for comments and questions, to Anna. So we hope that this will be one of many more presentations that reconciliation can share with me in this future year or in this present year.
She does. Thank you so much for that generous introduction, Rob. Good morning, friends. Can everyone hear me okay?
Okay. I'm not sure that they could. Can you ask again?
Yeah. Can people on Zoom hear me, or
give us a thumbs up? Can you ask for?
Oh, she put her thumb up.
Okay.
great.
I guess.
Great, thank you. So I want to start out with a territorial acknowledgement, and because so much of my work and life have been spent on these amazing ancestral and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, and I'm deeply indebted, and that's a relationship that means a great deal to me, and I try very hard to cultivate that relationship, and I feel I have a responsibility to that relationship and with the people of this land. And for the gracious, just really thankful for the gracious hosting for so many years. So Rob had done, again, very generously, an introduction, kind of a write-up about this presentation. And one of the things that was said in it, which I did need to correct, and I was trying to from Dalakula, where I was last week, joining a meeting via Zoom, is just, and I think it's just an important distinction. It's actually really kind of a happy correction, because I think it allows us to think about these connections and to try to be as kind of respectful about them as possible. So I grew up on the Newhawk territory of Dalakula. So all of what is now known as the Dalakula Valley and Bantakarm is considered the territory of the Newhawk people. And I was raised there and spent all of my life there until I moved to the Lower Mainland. But I did not grow up in the Newhawk Nation. So the Newhawk Nation means in Dalakula, the reserve, and I grew up on the territory, not the reserve. So my mother is in Newhawk. My mother was xʷməthkվəy from a place called Hatshell, which the settler name is Soda Creek, outside of Williams Lake. And but I never grew up in my territory, and my mother didn't either. And my father is Scots Canadian, many years in Canada. And I thought I'd start out today with this image, and I really want to thank Ruth and Tim for all of your hard work with the Zoom stuff, because it was really a challenging thing, and sometimes I imagine it's really hard to center down a meeting when you've got these details to consider. But I wish I could make it bigger. I'm sorry, folks. I hope that you can see this. I chose it because I think it's a very poignant metaphor. Sure, thank you. Well, right now, what we're looking at, this image is a picture that I took several years ago when I was first doing, thank you, that's perfect. First doing my PhD thesis. And this was taken in the downtown east side, and it's a sewage drain cover that the Musqueam artist Susan Point did with her daughter, Kelly Connell. And this was, they were commissioned rather to design these manhole covers, and they're throughout Vancouver. And there are 4 different versions. I think they're the life of a frog from a tadpole to full maturity. And if you see the circle, that's contained within a really important, something that's used a lot and referenced a lot in Coast Salish design form, and that's the spindle whirl. So that would be that circular shape that you're seeing. And a lot of, particularly Susan, but a lot of Coast Salish artists will have the kind of image contained within that circular form. So you can see a lot of the skill of the artist by the elegance of the form that's kind of sublimated inside the circle like that. But the reason, I mean, I love it, and I also love that people walk on it every day, that it's part of the ground. And it's kind of a good metaphor, I think, too, for thinking about colonialism, because it's so often everywhere, and so often hidden in plain sight, I think. So I'm just going to move up. So for many years, Vancouver was a city known for its imposing native art. So those are just my notes. It's not really important to have on my, I don't know. Maybe I can stop the screen share. At the bottom. Yeah. Sure. Oh, we can go to this one. Sorry, everyone. Anyway, so everyone thought of, for many years, for the better part of the last century, people thought of Vancouver as being a city that, was synonymous with native art and all kinds of Indigenous monuments. And so people thought very often would go to the Museum of Anthropology or think of the airport in recent years. Bill Reed's, many people here have probably seen Bill Reed's the jade canoe or the black canoe, which is based on argillite carving, which is slate carving from Haida Gwaii. And there's a big example of that at Vancouver Airport in the departure area. And that's Haida art, of course, from the northern part of British Columbia. And also the Totem Pole site in Vancouver. So people would go to the Totem Poles to kind of experience Vancouver culture, Indigenous culture, or think that was, Indigenous culture in Vancouver. Myself included. So I moved to Vancouver when I was 17. And I lived here for many years without actually knowing that none of that art is Coast Salish, and there are many kind of reasons for that. There's quite a big context for it, but so the Musqueam are the Hankamina downriver dialect of the Central Coast Salish Hulkamoon language speaking people, whose name itself means people of the river grass, and they have resided at the mouth of the Fraser River from time immemorial. So despite archaeological evidence showing continuous occupation going back at least 9,000 plus years, many more, and continuously residing on their territory. As the only urban Indian reservation in the Vancouver area proper, Coast Salish art and culture have remained largely hidden from public sight until probably about, the 2000s. So the Stanley Park Totem Poles are one of BC's most visited tourist attractions, and for many years was synonymous with Indigenous art and culture in the city. Residents and newcomers alike could admire the striking totem poles and monuments displayed in the park without ever really knowing that they had little to do with the actual Indigenous territory they were hosted on. Coast Salish are actually not amongst the groups that have totem poles or that traditionally used either the form lines or the ovoid shape found in the upper parts of the northwest coast, but use instead negative and positive relief patterns utilizing circular, crescent, and trigon shapes, which are often called Salish eyes. And there's an example here of that. So you have, when we say the eye shape, it looks like an eye. So you have a trigon shape, you have a circle, and you have a crescent, the crescent moon shape. So actually, Coast Salish art is often very easy to identify because it will be usually any combination of those shapes. And once you know that, it's a very distinctive art style, and you can usually spot Coast Salish art anywhere that will be utilizing those patterns in some way or other, and often the circular spindle or form. The Musqueam artist Susan Point, I did my second chapter on her, they're called People Amongst the People, Welcome Post Gateways, which went into Stanley Park in 2008. And I did my second chapter on those pieces, and I tried to introduce Susan because part of the whole kind of, I suppose, purpose of doing my PhD, what was really more interesting to me than looking at sort of archival things or looking at images was actually engaging with people and having conversations and visits with people and asking them in their own words how they felt about their art and the city and the relationship between those things. And Susan was the one person that I couldn't do an interview with. She's really, really busy, and she's a granny, and she had all kinds of things happening. And I tried to get a hold of her many times, and finally she just said, I just can't do it. I'm sorry. So I obviously respected that. And I I spent a lot of time with her work in Vancouver. There are several works throughout the city. But I also did a lot of reading, and Susan started her career at a time when not only were women carvers very rare, she's a woman carver, but Coast Salish work had languished almost to obscurity. So she did a lot of, she's kind of considered to have, not single-handedly, I wouldn't say that, but pretty much sort of reviving the Coast Salish style that we know today. And she did a lot of research, a lot of work, talking to elders, talking to her uncle, who was a Salish scholar, Mike Q, and learning herself, going to museums, going to visit sites, and to acquaint herself with the Coast Salish style. So, as I said, I think before, when she put in the Welcome Post Gateways into Stanley Park, she drew from house post tradition, which is something that the Musqueam have, which is something that Coast Salish people have instead of totem poles. As I understood it, Coast Salish don't believe that they came from animals, but from four people, four supernatural beings, and so they don't have that same whole culture or call themselves by animal clan names. So this was very, very radical when they went in for a number of reasons. I think because it was obviously it was they were the first Coast Salish artworks to go in at Stanley Park amongst the Totem Poles, which were actually imported from northern part of Vancouver Island, from Kwakwa territory, and from xʷməthkວəy in the 1920s. And they were actually put in on very spots where a Coast Salish village was razed to the ground. And there were important Coast Salish villages in what we now know as Stanley Park. And they were raised to make way for the park when it went in. And there were important middens and village sites. And some of that midden was actually used for our burial sites were used as fill for the rows that were put in through Stanley Park. So this is a history that many people don't know. So it was very radical in that way because it was calling attention to the fact that this was Coast Salish land, that Coast Salish villages had been there, but also introducing this design vocabulary, the Salish eye that had never been, that was very largely unfamiliar to most Vancouverites and people from the Lower Mainland. Let's see. Sorry, technical issues. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted.
Maybe we should stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah. Too bad.
Yeah.
And then,
For your patience, everyone, I feel pretty rusty. I have I defended my thesis in 2020, and I have not really spoken that much about it since then, except to friends and a bit where I work, but I haven't done any talks or anything for a while. So sorry if I'm a bit rusty.
but it's interesting to not come up.
We'll be very loose. That's okay.
Where did you?
I have it on my screens or no screens on my desktop, right?
Sure.
Let's see.
What did you write this?
Here, I've got it. So in the 1920s, I was saying, when those totem poles were first put up, the idea was to clear the land for the park and to make a beautiful park for Vancouver, but also to, I think with the totem poles, the idea was that they would go in where these so-called kind of unsightly villages were, and be this kind of very contained, almost kind of a palatable indigeneity that people could come and visit and see and enjoy and then leave again. And this, the thing with totem poles is that it's actually, it's a practice that's practiced in the northern parts of the northwest coast or up into Alaska by a few tribes on the northwest coast, the upper northwest coast. Northern part of Vancouver Island, the Vancouver Valley where I grew up, and into Alaska. And they really are about land and place and about families and their relationship to the land and to their animal spirits, to their family clans, and to commemorate important events. So they would have been raised to go up for, births, deaths, memorials, potlatches, and so on. But they weren't practiced at all by Coast Salish people. And when up in Stanley Park, they were very decontextualized. So what you're looking at in Stanley Park are very beautiful and powerful monuments, but they're also really taken out of their context. So I wanted to say that, so that when Susan's work went up, it was a comment on actual being on Coast Salish land, introducing this different design vocabulary and calling attention, I think, to the Salish presences that have been with us, that have been here in the city that Vancouver sits on for millennia. And also, I think, just to talk a little bit about the title, which is People Amongst the People. They're called Welcome Post Gateways, so which is significant, I think, in their reference to traditional Salish welcome figures, which would find going back for over 1,000 years. There have been Coast Salish figurines with their hands up like this, and this is a very significant sign of respect, respectful listening, agreement, and welcome in Coast Salish culture. So she called them welcome post gateways because and to me, it's really, really interesting and fitting, because it's also, I think, a reference to a really complex understanding of welcome in Coast Salish culture, which is that you are being welcomed onto Indigenous land here. You are being welcomed on Coast Salish land, but you are being invited by the territory holders, and in that welcome, you are being asked to sort of enter into a relationship with the territory holders through that welcome as a guest on these lands. And I think one of the things that I wanted to say, and I was caught up with the technical aspects of it, is that I grew up in a nation or a territory that wasn't my own. And my mother didn't grow up on her territory. And my grandmother was Bill C-31, so she didn't have her status under the Indian Act. And so I think that part of growing up in Belkula for me, and again, getting back to Susan, but I wanted to say this in the beginning, sorry everyone, was that there was so much division in Belkula, even though we were growing up in this incredible place, so powerful, with such powerful native presences going back thousands and thousands of years in Belkula. And yet there was so little actual, I mean, we had Newhawk neighbors, we had Newhawk friends, we studied together, went to school together. And yet, if you look at the nature of settler Newhawk relations in Belkula, they're still quite divided. People are still quite divided in that community, even though it's very isolated and remote. And I felt growing up there such a respect, and as I started to learn more about it, I felt a real grief, because it felt like a really big missed opportunity for a meeting place. There could have been so many meeting places, and I think that we really need to consider how where meeting places are, and to try to make those happen when we can. Because growing up there, I felt like I had missed out on this important opportunities to form respectful relations with people. So I think that my adult life and my scholarly work have really been about trying to unlearn the coloniality that I was raised with, and to relearn respectful relationship, and to learn to be a good guest on the lands that I'm on, whatever lands those are. And I think that Susan's work is really a testament to that. I think that her work is really about meeting places is really, I think it kind of invites people to in, and there's a certain flow to Coast Salish art as well. And there's a certain flow through the designs that are on the Welcome Coast gateways in Stanley Park that invite one to kind of sit, to linger, and to kind of engage with them. So I also wanted to reference in this in a really important book that I used a lot called Sabadeb, The Gifts, on Coast Salish art. Michael Pavel and Gerald Soubier Miller talk about the crescent, the trigon, and the circular shape as being about the interconnectedness of things, as well as the lesser known fourth element, which is the inner point of the trigon, or the kind of negative space, as being representative of making the four elements, in fact, not three, meaning as a reference to four seasons, four directions, and four stages of life. So Salish art and culture remained relatively obscured for the better part of the last century for a number of reasons, including taboos on depicting spiritual aspects of culture in explicit ways, which was very different from the whole culture and the farmland cultures, which are in the more northern parts of the province. And they're more a kind of everyday nature of their material culture, which would have been in spindle whorls, combs, mat creasers, things like that. And because a lot of, colonial powers that be, and, anthropologists and scholars at the turn of the last century would have seen that more monumental culture and totem poles and things like that as being kind of the most sought after, the most striking. And those things would have been more sought after for museums and things like that. And because Coast Salish culture had a much more quiet culture, and they kept their dancing and their practices, their religious practices, if you will, inside, and kept them, kind of practiced them in secret. It was thought that Coast Salish culture had assimilated or kind of died out. And in fact, they remain one of the strongest in terms of practicing their traditional culture. But because it wasn't sort of obvious to the outside world, it seemed that they had been assimilated. So Susan's work, I think that, I was arguing in my chat in my thesis that when Vancouver won the Olympic bid to have the Olympics in 2010, it actually really did a lot to shift, I think, a lot of how the public thought about the territory borders of these lands. So there was a lot of the First Nations groups here. The thinking was that if you're going to be hosting Olympics on our land, we want it known that this is our land. And there was a lot more bids for commissions for saying we want to have our voices heard, we want to be represented somewhat at the Olympics, we want to have a voice here, even though the Olympics were and are continue to be very problematic. This actually worked in some ways to further a deeper understanding of Coast Salish territories in which the city of Vancouver sits. So when this happened, there were more bids, or more rather commissions for Coast Salish work, and Susan's work started to go up in more places. There were other things as well, other factors that shifted the focus away from this kind of Indigenous elsewhere, which was all of the northern work, a lot of highway work, a lot of ʼwakw poles and culture that had sort of been imported into Vancouver to kind of overwrite the Indigenous peoples here. Indigenous culture here. But there was a change in that, a lot more dialogue with local First Nations. And then you're starting to see more and more of this artwork represented throughout the city. But so now when you go to the Totem Pole sites at Stanley Park, you see these three very striking gateways. And they also are a gateway. So there are two kind of posts on either side with a headpiece over the top, carved with Coast Salish designs. There are three different pieces. And you kind of enter into them and move around them, as opposed to being separated kind of by this, there's like kind of a little ditch area and then rise with the totem poles at the top. So yeah, one is invited to kind of come in and linger and move around them. So yeah, they were very important works, and yeah, and I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about this in this presentation. And I'm sorry, I've kind of rambled, and I think the tech stuff kind of threw me off. But I would welcome questions if people have comments or considerations. I'm sorry, I hope that made some sense. Sorry. Has anyone here seen Susan's work throughout the city or specifically? You've seen the manhole covers. Did you know who they were? Or
The stained glass windows and sorry, the stained glass windows in Christchurch Cathedral.
That's right.
With the cathedral are on the entrance into the cathedral. Some stones you see.
That's right.
They're so striking.
they are, that's right across from the Hotel Vancouver. Yeah, that's a beautiful space. And Bruce, you were saying that you've been to the Totem Pole site and seen her gateways there.
And point to the, the large spindle whorl in the law school
Oh, I don't
next
know.
to the Musqueam Declaration. And there's a right in the center of that. That's a big, that image is the key kind of symbolic image of the coast.
Right, the spindle wheel.
But may I tell a little story to supplement what you've said here?
Yes, please do.
So I'm the chair of the board of the Museum of Vancouver and chair of the collections. And a couple of years ago, a man named Katsalano came to he's the name holder from where the section of town came with Salem, the big culture power broker from Squamish. And they wanted the return of 3 masks that Major Matthews had acquired from Katsalano's grandfather. And so we thought about how we could do that because it falls under our patronage. There's a point to the story. And so initially I suggested that he Katsalano could borrow them when he wanted to dance the mask prerogative, which is the senior mask prerogative called the Sgsmåkvæ mask. And here's how it fits in your story. Sgsmåkvæ is a spirit being from Stanley Park, right where Lumberman's Arch is now.
Is that what the village was called?
Yes.
Is the village named after?
Yes. Anyhow, he had the prerogative to that. And so Salem and the other family members said that wasn't satisfactory, that, loaning him when he wanted to dance with these dance groups that are Sgsmåkvæ dance groups. So I thought, okay, if you dance, we'll give you these masks. And if you dance them in the Salish Longhouse, and we don't hear that some other claimant descended, see, the problem is there could be other claimants from the same families, and there could be many of them, and so we gave them to him, and then these other people came and said, well, why is it, why don't I have, that would be a problem. So I said, if you dance them in the Longhouse, and we don't hear that somebody objects to that, then that'll satisfy Coast Salish law. And meanwhile, we had to satisfy Canadian law because we hold these on behalf of the city. So he said, we'll get your whole genealogy and you can tell us about the past. So then COVID came, and then this is the point of the story that I think you'll like. Salem and Catalano and the families hosted an event, and they had a tent there, and it was surrounded by a big fence, and you couldn't see in. And they'd gotten permission for it, and they had about 300 people in there. And they had two dance of these Squamish dance groups, which are men dance and women sing, and they inherited through female line. And he danced the mask that his ancestor had made. And what I found was, so Catalano, who was the master of ceremonies, this famous young man, said, this is the first event of this kind in this place in 140 years.
Amazing.
And the other curious thing for me was, because I've been attending some of these kind of things since the 70s, I and the chair of the CEO of the museum, we were the only white people in presence. And we weren't central to it, we weren't called as witnesses, we just sat off in the corner. And also, all of the people who were called as witnesses had ancestral names, and the work was conducted in Huffamina. And so that represents an incredible trajectory of change that people are beginning to get some language ability. But it's right there, right near where you're talking about. Oh, and the other thing was that I want to say about the event was, it was entirely, like it was not promulgated to the white community. They didn't say anything about it to the media.
Yeah,
It was their event for themselves on their territory.
beautiful.
And it was, and then, of course, at the end, since it was a potlatch type event, I was loaded up with stuff.
Yeah.
And I had lots of cans of beans and things which were donated to
Yeah.
downtown. And it was actually recovered from heart surgery, and I had a hard time carrying it. But, so I think of all of that as really coming out of what Susan Point did. Opening this up to who, to this location, and that's the one I was describing, that's a Coast Salish event. And it's gone from making Susan Point's public thing, saying to the population, you come in the airport, here you are on Coast Salish
That's
territory.
great. Welcome.
To now they're saying, okay, now you guys heard about us, now we're gonna do our own thing. Thanks very much, we'll see you later.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I have a couple of things to say to that. I really appreciate you, your sharing our talks over our time, Bruce, and it's, I was thinking there were a couple of things I wanted to ask that I think might be of interest to people here. One is, you talk about being called to witness, and if you would be able to maybe talk a little bit, I don't want to put you on the spot, but about what that means in Coast Salish culture to be called to witness, and doing the work of, it's not called a potlatch in Coast Salish, it's culture, but in this kind of context. So doing that work is also something that I think people would find interesting to hear about and enlighten, because it's yes, please, if you would.
So the Coast Salish ceremony, typically people, all these kinds of events that you mentioned, people are asked to witness the work. And they say that it's a society that didn't cast its news by writing. So you were expected to go back to where you came from and share that news. And also, the other thing about it is that in theory, the work can fail. So you're holding a work to ratify that he has these maps. And it's always possible, and I've seen this happen, for people to get up and dispute it from their own community. And in which case, you would take back the news as a witness that, no, actually, he didn't get that name, or he didn't get that title or something. But that's the responsibility. So I guess Anna, I'm witnessing to that event. I mean, I wasn't called as a witness, but I was at the event. There, and so that's how they conduct all their kind of work in this location where we are here,
Being called to witness.
being called to witness.
Yeah, beautiful. And I was my son and Ira is my son, and I were invited to a Sďwməthkվəy at Musqueam, a naming. And my friend Brad, who brought me here this morning as a dancer, and they danced their masks, and it was a tremendous honor to be called to witness and to witness the work that was happening. And then, of course, there was a big giveaway, and I laughed because my son ended up with so many things. He had all these jars of beautiful blackberry jam, and he had blankets, and he had all kinds of things. He was just over the moon. I think he was probably about 10 at the time, and it was just wonderful. And then we were feasted. It was just a beautiful feast. It was really an honor to take part in that. But I'm thinking also about, I love this story about that you're telling about, you know, the ceremony or the coming together at Stanley Park on those lands. And these works, the welcome post gateways are actually formally titled People Amongst the People. And I've talked to folks that they find it really ironic and strange, like it's a strange title. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, because I think it points to that sort of the everyday, ongoing, ancient Indigenous presences of this land, which is that that they have always been here, that Musqueam and Coast Salish have always been here at the mouth of the Fraser. They've never left. And this idea in sort of modern coloniality that Indigenous people are displaced, or, you know, from the city, from cities, or not in place in cities, is actually completely untrue. And that many significant cities sat on Indigenous territory, important Indigenous sites all throughout Turtle Island, but also here, the Musqueam have been in their place for thousands and thousands of years. So they're part of the fabric of this city. And I love that. To me, that People Amongst the People really speaks to that title.
Can I add something to that? Here's a little pitch. The Museum of Vancouver has got an exhibit called Sgsmå, the City Before the City. Has anybody been to that?
Years ago, but it was when we went to the Musqueam.
Yeah, they have, it was the tripartite exhibit.
Yes.
We still have ours up. It won the first place in the National Museum Contest. And by the way, you might find this interesting. When we wrote a grant for that exhibit, so it's Musqueam, City Before the City, and they're talking about when you come out from the airport and drive over that little bridge, right underneath there is a midden that is where Sgsmå, the city before, they call it City Before the City, exists. And that lens of that midden is about 20 feet deep. And in there were, you know, some burials and so forth. And so my predecessor at the Museum of Vancouver a century ago, a guy named Charles Hilltooth, excavated some of that and tried to interpret it, and interpreted that the Musqueam were latecomers to this territory. And so part of the exhibit was to obscure the work that they did. So if you go there now, you can, we actually have, not I, but the people who made the exhibit, have obscured these busts, these crazy looking busts that he did. And then so when the city or the province gave a license to build on that site, and eventually revoked it, and then we chose to have this exhibit there, wrote this grant for it, and won first place in the grant competition. And get this, then the Harper administration blocked the grant. Can you imagine a federal bureaucrat blocking grants to museums? And I thought about it for a long time, and then I realized it's because Musqueam has won all these big lawsuits against Canada. And it was just payback, I think, from the Harper administration. Anyhow, the point of my story is it's still up. And there was one, so there's 3 parts there at MOA and then at Musqueam. Ours is still up. I'd like you to come and see it. A great, really wonderful exhibit that done together with Musqueam.
It is really wonderful.
Where is it exactly?
The Museum of Vancouver over in Central Park. That, you know, that museum that looks like a hat.
Yeah. Okay, good.
You know, I've been thinking, I ought to have a special tour for our meeting.
That would be
Yeah, really.
wonderful. That just came to me too. It would be wonderful to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I tried to look it up
Uh,
on the museum
How much?
website and I couldn't find it.
That's good.
Oh,
How about getting that on the knowledge network? If you do a presentation, get somebody who can put it up on the knowledge network so it gets disseminated across the province and further.
Well, that,
I think
I do this for you, but,
but.
yeah, but the Musqueam ought to do that, really.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm happy to do it for you
Yeah, I mean-
as my people here, but
yeah. Would you, I just wanted to ask you, you used some words, I'm sorry, I couldn't be here for the whole thing, but I heard you say just recently, on the people, the phrase something on the people.
Yeah.
Would you
that's-
repeat that phrase, please?
Yeah, so that was Susan, the title of these three gateways in Stanley Park, and I really encourage folks to go. And go when the weather is amenable, because it really is a very wonderful place to, a wonderful, thank you, a wonderful place to visit, and I think, you know, to linger, to sit, to enjoy, and I think there is that really strong sense of presence being there. And those pieces are formally titled People Amongst the People, Welcome Post Gateways. And so I was referring to that title of People Amongst the People as a kind of a reference to Coast Salish presences that have been here for so many years.
This may be wild supposition on my part, but I have, my field is epidemiology. And that from the Greek means the study of what is upon the people. And what happens when you look at a population as opposed to the individuals composing the population, when you look for events and explanations and causality, you see things by looking at the whole people that you do not see when you look at individuals. In medicine, it took about 100 years to learn that. So I just wanted to call that I think what we're dealing with is profound ways of understanding our experience. And so when I heard on the people, that kind of lit up. And I think that what's going on here has very broad implications actually for our survival. Because if we don't look at the whole population, we get in huge trouble.
I just wanted to talk about the piece, the frog. I come from the Ganetta clan, and that's frog clan. And I would love to go see that, because, you know, I'm going through the spiritual awakening. And, you know, that I talk about the little girl that's growing. It's like, that's that piece that I would love to see the tadpole. You know, God is, he strengthened me and built me and molded me into the person he needs me to be. And that frog clan represents me. You know, our people are awakening, and we're getting our culture back through dreams, through visions, through the awakening. Our ancestors are awakening all of us into the people that you know, that God needs us to be. And it's so amazing. I would love to go see that, just because of the things that I'm going through. You know, as soon as I accepted the person you know, the Aboriginal woman, as soon as I accepted that, that's when the awakening started happening more. You know, I was downloaded 2 songs, and that's our ancestors helping me awaken that spirit in me. And it's amazing, the feeling that I'm, you know, everything that I'm going through. And that piece, it's like, that's me. Oh my gosh, that's me. And you know, that's growing. And you know, our people, and you know, I'm not the only person, because I was so embarrassed of the person I was. I was so ashamed of being that Aboriginal woman, you know, I'm not embarrassed of who I am now. I can wear the native designs, I could wear the mufflets. You know, I could wear all of that without feeling embarrassed. And you know, now they're helping me. They're spiritually, you know, and I believe they're helping all the women, all our people who are finally awakening and not embarrassed of who we are. You know, after they found the remains of all those children, I think that's where we all felt, where we felt our people, our ancestors. You know, our people are healing, our ancestors are healing one person at a time. And it's so amazing. God is good, God is real, God is love, and you know, He's helping us, all of us. But thank you so much. I'll get that information from you after.
Yeah, you bet.
I just needed to share what I'm going through as an Aboriginal woman. I am here. We're here.
Yeah. That's right.
Yes, we're here, and you know, we're not gonna back down.
And
We're healers. We're healing, you know, we're the water people. We're what is it, the earth, or what is it called? That we're the ones that are here to save Mother Earth. That's what we are. That's what we do as Aboriginal people. Thank you. Anybody else?
Anna, where are those, you know, you talked about the Susan Point plates. I've seen them, but I can't remember exactly where they are. Where
They're
are you?
scattered throughout the city. And randomly, I don't think there's a particular order to them. You can look them up online. And you, if you look up, storm drains, Susan Point, you'll find them, and there are little blurbs about them from the city of Vancouver. I've come across them in the West End, I came across them in the downtown east side, I've come across them in other parts of East Van. You can find them in different places, but I kind of like that they're just very randomly just there, and you just happen on them, and they're kind of a nice reminder. It's like, oh yeah.
They're also in Seattle.
Are they? Yeah.
Really?
Well, because Coast Salish territory extends like down even into some parts of Montana, right? Isn't there some link to parts of Montana down through Washington and Oregon? And so they're a vast territory in the lower parts of Vancouver Island, southern parts of Vancouver Island as well. So yeah. But I really want to thank you, friends, for listening and for your patience with me today. I'm sorry if I seemed a bit scattered. And it's kind of hard to synopsize because, yeah, that's really something I need to work on, because when you're working on a big thing like a thesis, and I did for a long time, way too long, it was one of those things where you're kind of just doing it bit by bit by bit, this huge thing. So when you're asked to kind of focus in on one piece and make that sort of compact and sort of accessible in the form of a talk, that's really challenging. So,
You did it brilliantly.
well, thank you, and I appreciate your support and help, Bruce. And one thing I really wanted to do too, and then I've got to kind of draw this to a close because I've got to get going, but is I wanted to have it in a conversational way. And one of the things I was thinking about doing with my friend Brad, who came today, and we want to do it in future, is talk to him as a Musqueam person about what it was like. Like last night we were having dinner together, and he said, you know, growing up in Vancouver, it was just everything. And this isn't to disrespect totem poles, because they're very significant, they're very important. But the way that they have been kind of shown, used, seen, appreciated in Vancouver actually is very out of context. And so Brad was saying, as a Musqueam person, everything was really about totem poles. And he said I would just sit there and just tune out. I would think about other things. It was anytime we had a field trip, he said, and we went to the museum or we went to different places, he said it was just great because it was a day off, but I would just be daydreaming because it didn't have anything to do with us or you know. And so, which is really interesting, and this is someone who, who grew up here, who spent his, whole life here. So I think to finally start to see that representation in public spaces is just so significant for Musqueam people, for Coast Salish people. And so I wanted to ask him what it was like for him when those houseboats went up. And, to actually see their own culture reflected back at them. Yeah, I thought that would be an interesting conversation.
We have time for one more.
Yeah, I think.
And just the first image there, I'm not familiar with the pole or manhole cover medium for art. But I'm just curious and probably not a fair question for you, but do you know how that's somewhere, I suppose, in an engineering department in Vancouver City, somebody had the idea that, oh, maybe we need manhole covers, and then it went from that to, and I don't know what the norm is for manhole covers, but
That's a good
somehow it got to the art that it is now, and is it known how that process went about, or is it just?
I don't know, actually. I know that that Susan Point, the artist, you're not really asking this question, and her daughter applied for a bid that was put out for artists to, what is that called when they put kind of a bid out to the community for artists to apply to do those covers, and she won with her daughter and did them in collaboration with her daughter. Her son is also an artist, I think. But I have seen manhole covers in or sewage, I don't know if they're the same, storm drain covers in other cities, which also have, images on them. So I don't think.
Tradition, I suppose.
I don't think it's just unique to Vancouver, actually. I think that there are other, well, you were saying Seattle, but I think in other cities.
Well, Seattle has Susan Point.
Oh, does it have Susan's for it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They're the right size and they're round like a spindle.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I was just gonna ask the question. I went to the opening or whatever, the beginning of a poll that was by a Musqueam man. The snake with the forked tail, or two-headed snake that's in the middle of UBC. So it's a typical totem pole, and the question is, have they now adopted?
That's Jim Hart,
Okay,
and he's not Salish,
No, he's high.
it's not,
no.
okay.
We might be talking about two different things. So there was what was called a reconciliation pole that was raised by a Haida artist, and Jim Hart was the one responsible for, I think, carving the pole with community members. And that was raised here at UBC, and it was actually a bit controversial because I don't think that Musqueam were consulted in a way that they thought was adequate around that. But it is a beautiful thing to witness as well. But this, what you're talking about might be something else. It's like is it a double-headed serpent?
Yes, yes.
That's the serpent in Camosun Bog. There's a Musqueam story about the Camosun Bog double-headed serpent. And in the exhibit, we've got a large film that we got a Japanese person to make of that double-headed snake emerging.
Well, there's a totem pole at UBC, and I was there at the time, and it was billed as by Musqueam. So.
Where is that? Oh, at the law faculty.
Yes.
Yeah, it's right in the
middle of a sort of big concourse.
And there was a Squamish pole actually in the Totem Poles at Stanley Park called the Rose Cole Yelton pole, and Squamish didn't. They're Coast Salish and they didn't traditionally have poles either. So it may be like a collaboration, or it may be a new new way of working. Traditionally, they didn't have totem poles.
Yeah.
I just remembered too that there's another Susan Point art piece that I have seen that is it's a welcoming figure that's in the gathering place, which is the Indigenous center at Douglas College in New Westminster. And it's really hard to get to. It's like tucked away up on the like fourth floor. You've got to go down the long floor and everything to get to this. But I've been to different events there, and it's the only other public art that we have in New Westminster that is Indigenous or or kind of Indigenous.
But not to the
But
area.
not, yeah, but
There's a
not to the
totem
area.
pole.
It's, yes, there's a totem pole in front of Centennial Lodge that was erected in carved by Lloyd Wadhams Senior, his son, Lloyd Wadhams Junior, kind of worked on it and was re-erected last year. And then there's another pole that is in Woody Park that I would always see because it's just right near Sentry House, which I go to every day. And it just looks odd. And I asked the mayor about it. And apparently, he said that it was carved by a parks employee, like some 30 or 40 years ago.
Was he a native?
He was not Indigenous. It's there and
Pseudo totem.
it's a pseudo, it's not, yes.
Not only is it not a
Not
whole
from-
culture here, but it's
That
Exactly,
could be lovingly deconstructed and removed.
yes,
And somebody's done about that, and
I know.
somebody replaced it.
I know,
Yeah.
exactly, but it just shows like how, I mean, New Westminster was the kind of the birthplace of colonialism in British Columbia.
right.
And a different relationship with Indigenous peoples that existed, before during the fur trading period. And there was just a complete eradication of all Indigenous presence on the land. And so what was put in the last few decades, it's not always been very authentic.
Right, and there is that, thank you,
Oh,
I
sorry.
just thank you for that, Rob, and just to say that here in the Lower Mainland area, that was exactly the case, not just in New Westminster, but that it was like a colonial overwriting of the Indigenous presence, the Coast Salish presences here, with this public art that was imported from elsewhere. And there were actually many, kind of colonial reasons for that, because it was to suggest that that the people that were here had assimilated to the point where they no longer really existed as a culture, or that they had been replaced by that the original peoples here, as Bruce was suggesting, in early archaeological evidence, that had been replaced by another race of people, and that in fact didn't have the roots here that they have always had, and to suggest that that the work of the northern, farmland cultures, Haida, Tlingit, Tsimshian, and so on, were more evolved, advanced, and this was something that was in newspapers, was in all kinds of media, all throughout the last century, to justify the settlement of these lands. But also, was very much used as a kind of way to, to say that because Coast Salish art wasn't seen in the same way, that it wasn't important, it didn't really matter. So that if we think about that history here, and that work like that Susan's doing, other Coast Salish artists, when you see Coast Salish artworks now, and you see them in Granville Island, there's some beautiful murals, there's all the stuff at the airport. It really is radical in being about roots, and really thinking about those roots as that kind of talking back to that overwriting. And it's exciting to be alive at that time.
It's happening
this time.
right in front of us,
Totally.
in our lives.
Mhm. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
thank you for a wonderful presentation. And also, I think some seeds have been planted for some further work that
Yeah,
reconciliation committee and engage the meeting with and in our learning about, well, particularly the Indigenous peoples that on whose territory actually are living on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.